Welcome to American Overcoming Stories, the place where real sacrifice meets raw resilience. If you believe in stories that show the true depth of human courage, subscribe now. Because today, we begin the unbelievable journey of a man who threw his body over death itself and lived to tell the world what came after. Afghanistan, November 21st, 2010. A rooftop in the Helmand province. The sun burns hot, the air tense. Lance Corporal William Kyle Carpenter scans the area with his friend and fellow Marine Nick Eufrazio. They've done this routine a dozen times before. Patrol, observe, protect. But this time, something is different. From below, a flash, a metallic clink. The unmistakable sound of a grenade hitting the rooftop. No time to think, no time to run. Just one breath, one instinct. Kyle throws himself over it. The explosion is immediate, violent, deafening, total. His body absorbs. Nearly all of it. His face, his chest, his limbs are torn apart. Smoke fills the air. Nick lies unconscious. Kyle doesn't move. Medics rush in. They think he's dead. One begins to zip the black bag shut, until Kyle makes a sound, a breath, a heartbeat. He's alive, barely. And that moment would become the beginning of everything. Before Afghanistan, before medals, before pain and headlines, there was just Kyle, a quiet boy from Flowood, Mississippi, raised in a small-town home where discipline and faith walked side by side. He wasn't the loudest in the room, nor the strongest, but there was always something in his eyes. A steady calm, like a person who already understood that life wasn't about comfort, but about meaning. He grew up with two parents who worked hard, who taught him that no one owes you anything, and that service isn't something you wait for, it's something you give. Kyle listened, absorbed. He looked up to those in uniform, watched documentaries about Marines, and dreamed not of fame, but of being useful. As a teenager, he didn't chase attention. He helped his neighbors mow lawns. He opened doors without being asked. He kept his promises. He wasn't trying to be noticed. He was trying to be dependable. When he turned 17, that quiet fire inside him became something more. He sat down with his family and said, "I want to join the Marines." There was silence, worry, but no one stopped him, because they knew he wasn't chasing a uniform. He was answering something inside, and so began the path that would take him from small-town sidewalks to distant deserts. The boy who used to rake leaves for the elderly was about to walk into war. But the courage that would one day make him famous didn't start on a rooftop in Helmand. It started here, at home, in the small, unseen choices that define who we become. Boot camp wasn't just training, it was transformation. The days were long, the nights were colder, and every ounce of weakness was exposed under the weight of discipline. Kyle Carpenter had expected it to be hard, but he didn't know it would strip him down to the core and rebuild him piece by piece. Pain became routine, sweat became identity. Failure wasn't allowed, only improvement. And somewhere in that crucible of exhaustion and repetition, Kyle found something rare, a bond forged not in comfort, but in hardship. That's where he met Nick Eufrazio, sharp, loyal, driven. They were different in personality, but shared the same quiet hunger to protect, to serve, to be there for the man beside them. They trained side by side, pushed each other, watched each other's backs. They weren't just Marines in the making, they were brothers in formation. After graduating, they were deployed together, first to the same unit, then to the same base, and finally to the same rooftop in Helmand. By then, their connection went beyond duty. It was instinct. Kyle once said, "Nick was the kind of guy who didn't need to speak. You just knew he had your six." In the chaos of war, some bonds break. Theirs only got stronger. Helmand province wasn't just a place. It was a test. Dry, vast and deadly, the kind of terrain where every rock could hide an explosive, every corner could be an ambush. For Kyle Carpenter and his unit, it became a battlefield of nerves. They patrolled narrow alleyways, desolate rooftops and dusty roads, every step measured, every breath held. The enemy didn't wear uniforms. Danger came from the silence, the stillness, the two quiet mornings. Every day began the same. Prepare, move, scan, repeat. And every day ended with the same hope that everyone would return. Kyle grew harder. There, not bitter, just sharper, focused. He stopped thinking about himself and started thinking about the man on his left, the one on his right. War had a way of reducing things, stripping life down to the essentials: protection, instinct, loyalty. Nick and Kyle became inseparable. If Kyle went up, Nick followed. If Nick stayed behind, Kyle covered him. It wasn't about orders anymore. It was about trust. They shared meals, jokes, silence, and in the middle of a war zone, they built something unshakable. But Helmand didn't care about bonds. It didn't care about brotherhood. It tested everything, and on one rooftop, it would ask for everything Kyle had to give. November 21st, 2010. Another day in Helmand, another patrol, another rooftop. For Kyle Carpenter and Nick Eufrazio, it felt like routine. The same gear, the same view, the same war. But nothing about that day would be routine. They were positioned on a rooftop in a combat zone, tasked with watching over a dangerous stretch of road. The sun was harsh, the air dry. The silence around them buzzed with tension, too quiet for comfort. Then came the sound, a metallic thud, not loud, just enough to make your heart drop. A grenade, thrown from below. It landed right next to them. Time didn't slow down. It collapsed. Kyle didn't think. He moved. His body reacted faster than his mind could. Instinct, brotherhood, sacrifice. He threw himself onto the grenade. The explosion ripped through the rooftop. Smoke, dust, silence. Kyle's body absorbed the brunt of it, his chest torn open, his face shattered, his arm nearly severed. Nick lay beside him, unconscious but alive, because Kyle had chosen to take the blast. Marines rushed to the rooftop. Blood was everywhere. Kyle was motionless, barely breathing. One corpsman thought he was dead and began preparing a body bag. But then, a gasp, a flicker of life. Evacuation was immediate. A Black Hawk lifted him out while medics worked desperately to stabilize him. He had no pulse for several minutes. His heart stopped, then returned. He died, then came back. Again and again. In those chaotic moments, no one thought he'd survive. Not with those injuries. Not with half his face gone, one eye destroyed, lungs collapsed. He was a shell of a man, but inside that broken body, Kyle Carpenter was still fighting. That rooftop in Helmand didn't just take his flesh. It revealed the depth of his soul. They called it impossible. They said no one could survive that blast. But William Kyle Carpenter didn't just survive. He refused to die. After the explosion, he was flown to Camp Bastion, then to Landstuhl in Germany, and finally to Walter Reed Medical Center in the US. His body was a battlefield of its own. Shrapnel embedded deep in his skin, collapsed lungs, a fractured skull, broken ribs, and burns covering his face and chest. His right eye was gone, his jaw destroyed. For days he was kept in a medically induced coma. Doctors prepared for the worst. But Kyle? He just kept fighting. One surgery, then another and another. Over 40 in total. Weeks turned into months. Machines breathed for him. Tubes fed him. But slowly, against every prediction, he began to return. When he finally opened his eyes, the room went still. The boy who had died on a rooftop in Afghanistan was awake. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move much. But he was there, present, alive, and something behind his eyes, a quiet fire, told everyone around him, "I'm not done yet." The nurses cried, the surgeons stared, The Marines saluted. Kyle Carpenter had done the unthinkable. Now came the hardest part: healing. Recovery was not heroic. It was humiliating, exhausting, slow. Kyle Carpenter woke up to a body he barely recognized. Scarred, broken, fragile. He couldn't feed himself, couldn't sit up, couldn't smile. His face had to be rebuilt piece by piece. His arm was reconstructed with metal. His spirit, that would take even longer. But he showed up. Every day. Through pain so sharp it stole his breath. Through moments so dark, he questioned why he was still here. He learned to walk again, one shaky step at a time. Learned to speak with a new jaw. Learned to live with one eye and 1,000 memories no one could see. The surgeries continued. The scars multiplied. But so did his resolve. Kyle refused to be a victim. "If I'm breathing," he once said, "then I have something to be thankful for." That mindset changed everything. He smiled with half a face and made others laugh with a whole heart. The hospital halls knew his name, not because of his injuries, but because of his attitude. He didn't just heal, he inspired. The young Marine who'd thrown himself onto a grenade now threw himself into life with gratitude, with humor, with quiet strength. And the world began to notice. On June 19, 2014, in the East Room of the White House, President Barack Obama presented William Kyle Carpenter with the Medal of Honor. The room was full of generals, senators, and dignitaries. But Kyle stood there, not proud, not boastful, just humble, quiet, grateful, honoring those who never made it home. He was the youngest living recipient of the award. But to Kyle, it wasn't about being the youngest, or the most wounded, or the most recognized. It was about responsibility. He didn't see the medal as a reward, he saw it as a duty. In the years that followed, Kyle became more than a decorated Marine. He became a voice for veterans struggling in silence, for the wounded who felt invisible, for anyone who needed proof that light could come from ashes. He visited hospitals, met with wounded warriors, shook hands with families who'd lost sons. He gave speeches, not with politics, but with raw truth. "I'm not defined by what happened to me," he'd say. "I'm defined by how I choose to live after it." He wrote a book, You Are Worth It, not to tell his story, but to remind others of theirs. Kyle Carpenter didn't return from war the same, but he came back with a message the world needed to hear. Today, William Kyle Carpenter is not defined by scars or medals, but by purpose. He travels the country speaking to students, veterans, and ordinary people about gratitude, discipline, and resilience. He runs marathons. He skydives. He wakes up each day with a mission no longer shaped by war, but by life. He talks about pain openly, about how dark days still come, but also about how every day above ground is a gift, no matter how broken you feel. His message isn't complicated. It's not about being fearless. It's about being faithful to the fight within. He doesn't pretend to be invincible. He simply refuses to be invisible. From the ashes of a rooftop in Afghanistan, Kyle Carpenter didn't just survive. He rebuilt something greater than before. Not a soldier, not a symbol, but a man who chose to live and to remind others they can, too. If Kyle Carpenter's story moved you, take a moment to reflect on what it means to truly live. Leave a comment below and share what part of his journey inspired you the most. Like this video if you believe his courage deserves to be remembered. And don't forget to subscribe to American Overcoming Stories for more powerful true stories of veterans who turned pain into purpose.